Welcome back. In this video, we're going to build on our previous video. I showed you how to set up an application and project that would allow our sample application to log in and visualize the JOT that was returned so that we could see the user authenticated information, including claims. Now, while that's useful for navigating the Zitadel dashboard, we also want to show you how you can integrate this into your own application. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at how to hook up Zitadel using my favorite web framework, which is Astro. Most of what you're going to see is applicable across other frameworks, but fear not, we will be taking a look at some more options in the coming weeks. But let's kick things off with Zitadel integrated with Astro. Let's have some fun. All right, so the best place to start is by taking a look at what we have already. If I run ls, you'll see that I have a source, public, Astro config, a few other bits and pieces. This was all created with bun create, Astro add latest. That is all. However, I did have Claude Code whip up a little bit of a design to improve the aesthetic of the application. If we pop over to the browser, hit refresh, you'll just see it has modified the default Astro homepage with a welcome to a Zitadel demo, and it's added a login button, which click, 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 click. To use our Scottish term, it does hee-haw. It does nothing. We need to hook this up, and we're going to do that together. We will leave our dev server running here, head over to VS Code, and the first thing we need to do is install a couple of dependencies. So let's tackle that first. So the first thing we need to do is open our package.json and come to our dependencies. We need to add a library called Arctic. We can let VS Code work out the latest version, hit save, and then run bun install. And that's it. It's pretty much the only dependency we need. If we search for the Arctic project, you'll see that this is just a bunch of helpers for working with OIDC and OAuth in any Node, JavaScript, TypeScript, Bun, Dino based project. It's a fantastic library and it's going to make everything very, very simple for us to integrate with Astro today. The next thing we need to do is create a .env, and I'm going to add RC because I really like to use .env. It just keeps things nice and simple. We want to export our Zitadel client ID, which will be a string. And we want to export a Zitadel URL, which is where our Zitadel instance can be found. We will grab both of these from the Zitadel console. This is the same Zitadel Cloud free instance that I used in a previous video to demo PKCE. And I still can't say that. We're going to go to projects, click on Raw Code Academy. And this is the React one we used last time, but today we're going to say Astro, choose web, select PKCE, and then we're going to put this in development mode, input our port, and we'll need a callback address, so I'll just call this auth callback. I'm not worried about a post logout URL for now. When we create this, we are given our client ID. Now, the fantastic thing about PKCE is that we don't need to handle any secret material. Meaning, if you want to commit this client ID to your Git repository, public or not, you are perfectly safe to do so. It's a fantastic flow. I encourage you to use it. So now we can come over here and we can say that our client ID is now this. We click close. And what we want to grab is our Zitadel URL, which for Zitadel Cloud is here. If you are running this on Docker Compose, Kubernetes, or anything else, you just need to use the same URL that you use to log in to the console. With that envrc, I can do .env allow, and we'll see that these two environment variables are now available for me to consume within my application. Now, I will have to restart my bun run dev server and allow .env in this session so that my Astro application has access to both of these variables. Now we can head over to our Astro config where we do need to make some changes. We're first going to turn on output to server. We could do hybrid, but we do need some API endpoints. And if you wanted a fancy login button that is dynamic based on the user as they approach the page, you would have to use Astro Server Elements. This is not the point of this video. I'm just keeping things simple by using server. Now, if you know what you're doing, walk your own path. We can also use Astro Env to say that we have access to some certain properties. We want our Zitadel URL, which is an env field of a string value. I like that Astro Env allows us to have slightly more sophisticated configuration, even though it's coming from the environment. We can set the context for this, and we can say that this is available on the server. Again, it's not secret. You could make this available on the client too, just not a big deal. And we can set the access of this to public. Again, it's not a secret material. We then have our client ID, and we'll just do the exact same again here. Now that I see a red squiggle, I realize that I actually need to move all of this under schema. Copilot, stay out of the way for now. And that looks a little bit better. We can also turn on validate secrets to true, even though we don't have any. Just good practice for Astro env. Now we move on to the slightly trickier component, although it's not that tricky, is that we need to provide something to handle our Zitadel configuration. First thing I'll do is just create something called lib with a zitadel.ts. And to spare you the pain of watching me go clickety-clack, we'll use some movie magic where we'll skip to the final output of this file, and we can go over it and review it in a sensible fashion. Just like that. So what do we have here? Well, we have the Astro env where we're pulling in the two variables that we need. We have two dependencies that we haven't talked about yet, so I'll get to that in a minute. We have our Arctic dependencies, which allows us to handle, we allow that to handle most of the heavy lifting with the OAuth stuff. These two dependencies you may or may not need. Oslo.js just has some JOT helpers to allow us to decode the JOT. And the OIDC client.ts is really just using that as a type so we can get the basic skeleton of the claims without having to provide our own type or use any types or anything like that. We then have our Zitadel class. We have an authorization endpoint, our redirect, and our token endpoint. We then have our create authorization URL. So as a user attempts to log in, this function is going to create the URL that we need to send as part of the redirect. And you can see here it's just setting up the OIDC flow. So it's saying that we want to get an access code. We have a client ID. Don't know why that search params had the wrong casing. We then create our code challenge. Again, this is part of the PKCE flow and return the URL. This gives us everything that we need on the client side. Once we have the authorization URL to just say, hey, go and speak to Zitadel and come back when you have some sort of authorization code. That means we can trust that you say who you say you are. That isn't a weird sentence at all. We then need a function to validate the authorization code that we get when they come back. So we just, set the parameters, create an OAuth request, and then send this to the Zitadel server. This function here is using the optional stuff. This is if you do wish to get user information you may not need. You may just be satisfied that you have an authenticated user and you can confirm that they are a user. However, you may want a little bit more information than their subject ID, which is their user ID. So that's where these optional libraries come in and where we can decode the JWT, get the typed claims out, and then introspect them in some way. Again, completely optional, not something that you need, and it's entirely up to your use case. So you can decide whether that is a path that you need to go down. So let's open API off, sign in. No movie magic, just pre-configured file. But we're going to run through it. We pull in two functions from Arctic, we pull in our Zitadel, and we've got some types from the Astro with pre-render and set to false. Of course, this depends whether you're using server-side, static, hybrid. I just like to set pre-render to false all the time so that if I ever do change the output method in the Astro config, nothing breaks on the website. We instantiate Zitadel. We use the Arctic functions to get the code and the verifier, or at least the state in the verifier. And then you'll see here, we're just putting them into cookies. That just means we have access to them when we want to verify and validate any access token that we get from Zitadel. And we call our create authorization URL function that we created in the Zitadel class with the scopes, OpenID, profile, and email. These are pretty much the default scopes. It gives you just enough information to ensure that you have a valid user. We then just have a redirect. So the client will get redirected to the Zitadel server where they'll go through the authentication process, like so. We then have callback.ts. Much the same, API root, Zitadel class, pre-render false. This time we're expecting to receive some information on the URL. The first thing we do is grab the code and state, make sure they exist, validate them and verify them against the cookie values. We're making sure there's no injection tags or man in the middle. If we're happy with that, we can delete the cookies. And then we move on to the fun bit, which is instantiating Zitadel and then calling our validate authorization code, passing in the two values. So you can see here how we're using the two functions we created in the Zitadel just to validate things on the client side. And again, Arctic is doing all of the heavy lifting here. There's not really a lot for us to do. If we get back a valid token, that is, we don't get an error when we validate authorization code, we can then set the tokens that we get back from Zitadel into cookies so that they are available on subsequent requests. If we have a refresh token, and we'll cover refresh tokens further on in the course, then we also persist that, and we just redirect to the homepage. That's all we need to do right now. That means if we open up components and welcome, this is our homepage, we can find the button for login. We can make this an anchor tag with an href, and Copilot is already trying to jump in here and do everything for me. We can say auth, sign in, like so. Close that off, grab the closing tag, and wrap it around our button, like so. This should already have reloaded. We can come back here, and we can click login. It took us back to the home page, so one should assume that things are okay. But I don't expect you to trust me. We can open our DevTools, go to storage, and already we'll see here we have 4 different values: access token, verifier, ID, and state. What I'm actually just going to do is delete all of them, pop open our Zitadel console, and log out. We'll go back to localhost, click login, and now we get the Zitadel authentication flow. Now I could click on my admin user, or I can click other, where I could say register and say Astro demo, astro@rockcode.academy. We will save this password like so. I can agree to the terms and the privacy policy and click next. That's going to send me an email code. Now I could wait for that, but instead I'm going to click go back. Because Zitadel has fantastic multi-account support, I'll log in as my admin user. Go to users. We can now see that Astro demo is in an initial state. This means this user has not been verified. From here, we can resend the activation email, modify their username. Maybe I just want them to be Astro. All of this is configurable in the organization settings. We'll be diving into that very, very soon. You can set nicknames, gender, language, and if I want, I can modify their email address. Say they got in touch and said, oh, I used the wrong email. Maybe it should have been a plus address. Click send. We can go into passwords. We can reset it, add multiple factors. We can do identity providers, authorization, memberships, metadata. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we are going to cover when it comes to user management and authorization of Zed. But that is for another video in this course. So I hope you see that integrating with Astro is super simple. We create a class, You can reuse that across as many Astro websites as you want, copy and paste, or publish it as an internal or public package. Maybe that's something I'll do in the future. And we're leaning into existing libraries like Arctic and others to make this almost child's play. I hope you found this useful. Join us for the next video as we take a look at more Zitadel features. Notably next, we'll be taking a look at the RBAC model and authorization. We'll see you then.